Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Behind the Scenes of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. I am your host, Jason Jrock Houston, and man, we got a great episode to talk about tonight. As you know, every week we do one of our little preview episodes. You're watching right now, as I said, Behind the Scenes of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution, and what that is every Wednesday night before I go to bed, folks. I recorded one of these episodes, and we talk about the brand new episode of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. Is going to roll out Thursday morning, 24 hours from now at 8 a.m. in the morning. So be on the lookout for that. I know you guys are all asking, so what are we going to talk about this week? Well, this is going to be a really, really fun episode. I know they all are, right? Well, we're going to talk about in episode number 35 of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. That's the name of our show, of course. Is we're going to talk about the 1970s Fonzie craze. Now, anybody, and I mean anybody, that was around in the 1970s and 1980s, there's no way you didn't know who the Fonz was. Of course, the Fonz is a great, great character that originated on the 1970s sitcom Happy Days. And I tell you, tomorrow, our episode is it's about a little over 40 minutes long because just had so much to talk about. And the Fonz is probably, if I'm honest, my all-time favorite TV character. So one character that I just still love to this day. I mean, let's go back to, in 1970s when we first discovered Arthur Fonzarelli, a.k.a. the Fonz on Happy Days. I mean, everybody pretty much, if you were a guy in the 1970s, you pretty much wanted to be the Fonz. You wish you were the Fonz. The Fonz was like a rock star, Fonzie didn't really sing. He didn't play the guitar or anything like that. He was just cool. And again, when you think of the Fonz, there's certain things you think about. Okay, the Fonz was a guy that he could just snap his fingers and the girls would come running. He had the move, cool guy. He was like a kind of a 50s greaser type of guy. His hair was so perfect, not a hair out of place. He had the move where at the local hangout, Arnold's Drive-In. He had the move where he could just hit the jukebox and the music on the jukebox would start playing. I remember as a kid, every time I'd see the Fonz do that, I hit the wall or something, or I hit the radio trying to pretend that I could make the music start. Of course, again, like I said, especially if you were a kid like me back in the 1970s, you just thought the Fonz was the coolest thing. And if you were a guy like me, you wish you were as cool as the Fonz. And even if you weren't, you wanted to try to be as cool as the Fonz was. And the Fonz was such a major breakout star in Happy Days that not even the show's creator Gary Marshall or the writers or producers on the show really had any idea of how big the Fonzie character was going to be. It just kind of happened. He just kind of broke out in a huge way. And I think part of it is, Henry Winkler, the actor that played the Fonz, he was so into the part that he really took a lot of, he was involved with kind of certain things like from what I understand, it was Henry Winkler kind of came up with the idea about snapping the fingers, and he took certain liberties with the character. Now like Fonzie, for example, if we talk about an episode, for example, people would look at him, they think he was a hood, but you get to know the Fonz and you find out, no, the Fonz is really a good guy deep down. He's loyal to his friends. He looks out for other people. He doesn't like other people being picked on or mistreated. He stands up for people that maybe aren't as cool as him, and he's a local hero to all the kids And again, all the kids want to be like him. All the girls want to uh, go out with the Fonz. And again, all the you got Ralph and Potsy and Richie. They all wish they were as cool as the Fonz, and maybe they'll never be as cool as the Fonz, but they get to hang out with him. The Fonz kind of, when they get in trouble, he kind of always comes to their rescue. The Fonz is a cool guy in so many ways, and I just remember as a kid really wanting to be the Fonz. And you talk about the influence a TV character could have on people. I mean, I remember in the 1970s, and this is true with me too. I was just a kid, but I remember watching Happy Days, and that I wanted to be so much like the Fonz. I told my mom and dad, hey, I want a leather jacket like the Fonz, and I got it one Christmas. Mom and dad actually got me a leather jacket, and tell you, I put that leather jacket on, and I thought I was the Fonz. Of course, I wasn't, but I thought I was. Made me feel like, oh man, I look just like my hero, the Fonz. I am cool like the Fonz. I wasn't, but I thought I was. Whatever. And so the Fonz, you ever hear the old saying, "Everybody needs a hero"? Well, that's what the Fonz was to a lot of kids in the 1970s growing up. With Happy Days, and you got to remember when Happy Days launched in the early 1970s, the show was originally centered around young Ronnie Howard, who had previously, for most of his childhood, been known to as Opie on the Andy Griffith Show. He grew up before many people's eyes on TV. I caught the Andy Griffith Show, of course, in reruns because that was a little before my time. But to come to find out, that Richie Cunningham, he was a little kid on Andy Griffith. Oh wow, of course, if you go and watch those old Andy Griffith reruns, you could kind of tell that was Ron Howard as a young boy. But man, by the time they do Happy Days, he's all grown up. And again, it's interesting because Happy Days was originally, like I said, centered around Ron Howard. But once Henry Winkler's character, the Fonz, came on board, nobody's seen what was going to happen next. I mean, you got to remember when Henry Winkler came on the scene as the Fonz, the Cunninghams originally had three children. Chuck was the oldest, Richie was the middle child, and Joni was the youngest daughter, the only daughter. and the more popular a Fonzie character became, eventually the writers and Gary Marshall felt there was really no need to have an older brother. The Fonz was hanging out with Richie, and he was becoming more and more like an older brother type figure to Richie. So Gary Marshall very much felt like, well, there's really no room, no need for an older brother. We'll just kind of get rid of him. We'll just kind of write him out of the script. And Gary Marshall, it's interesting because I heard him talk over years in interviews. People said, oh, whatever happened to Chuck? Well, we just kind of wrote him out of the story. We never really said what happened. And, people may want to know, but, we kind of got that power just to kind of write him out of the story, and we don't have to really answer. And it's kind of funny. I think he was right in many ways because, the show, it's not that the show became less popular because Chuck Cunningham left, was never seen or heard from again. But if anything, the show became more popular because of the Fonzie character. Fonzie started, being more involved with the Cunningham family. It got to a point where, okay, well, we need to figure something out. So give him a reason to be around the Cunningham family. So they ended up, Fonzie looking for a place for his grandmother in one of the episodes. And what ends up happening is Richie comes up with a great idea. Hey, Fonz, why don't you, if your grandmother's not going to move in, why don't you move into the apartment upstairs, Fonz? It would be so cool to have you living up there. And then, of course, Fonz living above the Cunningham's, house. He becomes practically an honorary Cunningham, himself, and he's always around the family, and it became very much more of a family-oriented show. And interestingly enough, again, like I said at the top of tonight's episode, one of the things when we think of the Fonz, you think of naturally his leather jacket. but it's kind of funny to go back and realize if you watch reruns that the Fonz did not have the leather jacket like in the first two seasons. I think it was until the third season they started letting him wear a leather jacket. Originally, the Fonz wore, like if you can believe it, a windbreaker type of jacket. And the reason for that is the brass, the executives, the brass at the ABC network, they felt can't have can't have Fonzie wearing a leather jacket because he'll be seen as a criminal. He'll be seen as a hoodlum. People will think he's a lowlife. And it's so funny what the executives think they know, and because they were so wrong. It got to the point where they started having a rule about the leather jacket. Okay, well, he can wear a leather jacket, but not in every scene. Only in certain scenes, like if he's riding the motorcycle, that was one of the rules. And then he could have on the leather jacket because it kind of made sense. But eventually, Henry Winkler just started wearing the jacket all the time, and it got to the point where the audience almost kind of demanded the Fonz wear the leather jacket, and because of the popularity of the Fonz, like I said, people started going out and buying leather jackets like never before because everybody wanted to be like the Fonz. And again, other certain things like you know when you think of the Fonz, I mean, talk about catchphrases. Hey, hey, Fonz, what's going on? Hey, how you doing, Fonz? Hey, we kind of, without even knowing what he's saying, you know what he's saying. Like, it's cool. How you doing, Fonz? Hey, okay, must be doing good. A can kind of mean whatever you want it to. That's one of the things I used to love about that. And then Fonzie as a character is kind of interesting because he very much, like I said, almost throughout the entire history of the Happy Days show, he becomes very close with Richie and Joni and the entire Cunningham family. He often thinks of Mr. and Mrs. C almost as his almost as his maybe like their adopted parents, or something, and he kind of thinks of himself as an honorary Cunningham, like part of the family. He often joins them for dinner, at dinner time, and they got a place at the dinner table for him. He's always welcome there. One of my all-time favorite episodes that was centered around the Fonz. We actually did a whole 30-minute episode of our show on. It was a Christmas themed show. I believe it's called "Who's Coming to Dinner," and basically what it is the Fonz has nowhere to go for Christmas, but because he's the local hero, everybody thinks the Fonz is so cool. He can't let anybody know, but the Fonz has nowhere to go for Christmas. And part of the reason for that is the Fonz really doesn't have a family. And when I say he doesn't have a family, we see throughout the history of the Happy Day show, like eventually he's got a nephew, Spike, and Spike's real name is AKA Raymond. Now, the Fonz is supposed to be an only child, and so Richie and Mr. C in one of the episodes says, "Hey, Fonzie, um, Spike's your nephew, but you don't have any brothers or sisters." Well, hey, he's my cousin. I'm his older cousin, but um, I'm it's cool. He feels more comfortable calling me Uncle Fonz, and so I let him do that. And then Spike, kind of very much in the same way as Chuck Cunningham, just kind of disappears. He appears in like 2 or 3 episodes and never see or hear. And then eventually, Fonzie gets another cousin, Chachi Arcola, who's sweet on Joni Cunningham, and calls her Blue Eyes and stuff. And there's a little bit of a kind of attraction thing going on between Joni and Chachi. And by the final episode, they end up getting married in the final episode of Happy Days. And of course, Chachi's mother, Louisa, who eventually marries Al, and they move away to Chicago, and then you get the spinoff Joni Loves Chachi. But there's an episode too where we learn that Never hear Fonzie talk much about his mother or father, except for that they took off on him when he was very, very young, left him with his grandmother to raise him, and so the Fonz never really experienced much of a family life until he met Richie and the Cunninghams, and so he's almost like I said, an honorary Cunningham, and Mr. C. When he first, I remember one of the episodes he tells Fonzie, Fonzie, I remember when Richie brought you home and I met you for the first time, I wasn't too sure about you, but think of you as a son, and you're part of our family, and it was just nice how people like the Cunningham family could take to somebody like a guy like Fonzie and make him feel like he was such a major part of their family. And so, again, Happy Days is one of those shows that I never get tired of watching. I tape when I'm at work every day. I tape episodes of Happy Days that play during the day, and then on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday when I'm off from work, I watch a lot of these reruns. Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, Three's Companies, and stuff like that. And that gives me a lot of ideas for these episodes we do. And so again, I thought, not just looking back on Happy Days, but let's take a real kind of hard look at the popularity of the Fonzie character and why he was so popular. I mean, like I said, again, Happy Days started out being a show centered around Ron Howard, and without even meaning to do so, because Henry Winkler apparently was kind of actor. He did not have a huge ego, despite the success of the Fonzie character. He could have had a huge ego and tried to. It got to a point where Gary Marshall was even thinking about, okay, you know what, we're going to start. We're going to really start centering the show around the Fonz, and they were really strongly considering calling it Fonzie's Happy Days. But Ron Howard let Gary Marshall know, no, I have no problem with Henry Winkler's popularity and the rise of the success of the Fonzie character, but no, if you change the name of the show, Gary, I'm going to leave the show. He ultimately left, anyways, a few years later because he wanted to go on and have a successful, directing career, and he went on, and became a very, very successful director. In fact, Ron Howard is thought more of these days as a successful film director than what he did on Happy Days. But I will always think of Ron Howard, of course, as Richie the C, Richie Cunningham. And again, until I ever watched Happy Days, I don't think I knew what a nerd was. Never heard that word before. But of course, that's another word in the Fonz's vocabulary. Hey, what's up, you nerd? Nerd means kind of somebody that's not as cool as the Fonz. They need help, they need guidance, maybe like Fonz often, but nerds like Richie, Ralph, and Posse that he hangs out with. Oftentimes, the Fonz, like I said, comes to their rescue. He saves them when they get in trouble. He gives them guidance, and they all listen and accept what the Fonz says because he is the Fonz, And again, it's just one of those things that's understood. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. It's episode number 35, and we're talking all about the Fonz. And I will say this before we wrap up tonight's episode. We also talk about the 1970s Fonzie craze, get into the merchandising. And I forgot about just how much merchandising that went along with the Fonz. Everything from board games to trading cards to action figures, if you can believe it, and so much more. We've only just touched the surface tonight, and I will wish you guys a happy Father's Day to all you dads out there coming up this Sunday. Happy Father's Day, and we do this again next week, because I always like to clue you in on what's coming up. We're going to be doing a real special episode on Judas Priest. They're going to come out this Friday on June 19th with a brand new Best of Greatest Hits collection called, what else? The Best of Judas Priest. And so we're going to be getting into that when we film episode number 36 later this week. And that'll be going up next week, 1 week away from now. And we're already talking about what's next. That's what we always like to do on this show. But remember, tune in tomorrow at 8 a.m. on the Fire Rock TV YouTube channel, and you will see episode number 35 of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution, talking all about the Fonz. Bye for now.